You're listening to TFM.
Want to join in the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode? Join the Babel Conference, our listeners' discussion group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field, and we look forward to seeing you there.
This is Steve Sansweet of Rancho Obi-Wan, and you're listening to the 602 Club.
Hello and welcome to TFM's local watering hole. I am just one of your hosts here, Matthew Rushing, and am I one of your hosts, or a variant? Yes, and with me is, she is in some universes, Christy Morris.
That's Miss Minutes to y'all.
I love that it's Tara Strong doing Miss Minutes. So, of course, famous for being Harley Quinn in the Batman the Animated Series. So, yeah, that's just fantastic. So, we are going to have some fun this week because we're going to be universe hopping with Loki and the Marvel Universe. In fact, that's 2 weeks in a row, folks, with the Marvel Universe. We talked about Black Widow last week, and of course, this week we are discussing the entire first season here of Loki, which, spoiler alert, we found out there's going to be a second season, which didn't know that coming into this, so that's kind of fun. But before we get there, just want to say a huge thank you to everyone who's listening. You know, if you love the show, subscribe to the show. Make sure you get the show as soon as you drop. Share it with your friends. One of the best ways to help the show grow is if you're on Apple Podcasts, give us a star rating and review. We'll actually read that review on the show as well. So thank you for doing that. You can also find us online. You know, make sure you're following us on Twitter so you can keep up with everything going on with the 602 Club, as well as all of the good new nerd news that's going on. Again, that's at the 602 Club. You can find us on Instagram at the 602 Club TFM. We got our presence online at trek.fm, where you can find all of the shows we're doing here on the network. And of course, you can find the Babel Conference, which is the listeners only discussion group there on Facebook, which is fun to join, where you can talk to listeners from all over the world. And then if you wanted to send us an email, you can always go email. It's trek.fm/contact. Choose a show. Choose the 602 Club. And that comes to Christy and I. And we want to say a huge thank you. We've got some associate producers here through Patreon: Ken, Tripp, Davis, Grayson, Ryan, Maillet, Daniel, Noah. I really appreciate them supporting the network and the show all of these years. And they make sure that each and every week this keeps coming to you. And if you like what we do, we could definitely use your help. So go to patreon.com/trekfm and see how you can be part of the team. Every little bit helps. And again, that is patreon.com/trekfm. So, Chrissy, you know, one of the things that's just been interesting about these Marvel shows, and I'm really interested to kind of find out, where were you coming into this one? You know, like, were you excited about Loki? Was this one that you're just kind of like, oh, okay, you know, or were you just really pumped for this?
I was really pumped for this because I've loved Loki in the MCU films so much. I think that Tom Hiddleston absolutely now is synonymous with that character. I think that the wardrobe that they went for still showed, you know, some remnants of that MCU film version of Loki. And so I was really interested to see how they were going to go with this and delve more into him and maybe do like a good character study and things like that. So, were you feeling pumped as well, or were you not so sure about it?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that I was really interested in seeing, you know, where it would go and how it would play out and kind of what they would do with the character, you know. And I think coming in, I was slightly apprehensive just because I feel like, I think, you know, them creating these villains that then kind of slowly turn into heroes is a little bit tiresome. And I feel like they've been trying to do that with Loki for a long time. And at the same time, though, Loki has the opportunity to be able to go in that direction, right? Because of everything they've been doing with it. And I was really interested, could they pull that off? Like, could they do it well, right? Because if you're going to go that way, there's a way you can do it, but it's going to need some serious exploration of the character and self-reflection for the character. And I didn't know if we would get that or not, right? And so I guess I was kind of excited because of even just the trailers and everything for the show looked pretty crazy. But then at the same time, I had some reservations going in on like, how can they make this work, and will they be able to make it work with this character? And so, I think, that's kind of just where I was. And so, we're going to do things a little bit differently, kind of more of what we've done when we've reviewed some of the other shows out there, but we're going to kind of talk through the different episodes, and I think that's going to lead us some really interesting thematic conversation as well. But, one of the things I was really interested in is the way in which, episode 1 does, I think, it takes its time to help you figure everything out. Like, it doesn't go too fast. And I think that's one of the things that episode 1 does the best.
Yeah, I agree. Because, obviously, we're coming into each of these individual series off of a very complex and interwoven story from the films. The last thing that we know is that we saw Loki die in Endgame. And so you kind of wondered at the beginning, well, where are they going to go? Is this going to be like a flashback? How are they going to handle him being dead and then trying to do a series about him? So I do agree. I think they did a good job of explaining how they got to that, and how he ends up at the TVA and why.
Yeah, I do think they do a great job with that. Obviously we go back to 2012 during Endgame, where he picks up the tesseract and he disappears. And I think one of the things that I really appreciated was how this episode sets up this kind of omnipresent TVA in a way that really makes sense, to where you're really feeling how powerful this organization is. Like, I think that's the thing that really struck me in this episode, was just, by the end of it, when Loki realizes that the Infinity Stones are meaningless to these people, that everything that we thought was super powerful in the MCU is really just like a paperweight. I thought that really set up for episode 1, that sets up just what we're dealing with really well, I thought.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think that he didn't even believe the power that they said they had until he saw that. Because he knew, he had seen what it took, the power it took to bring all the stones together and then to wield them as one. And so to see it treated like, a desk artwork, he then had a change of heart in the situation, or of realization that things weren't what they seemed.
Right. Well, and I think, the other thing that I felt like it did a good job of, introducing us to the main players there at the TVA as well. We've got Judge Renslayer, we've got Mobius, and, we also introduce, Miss Minutes, I think. Did we miss Miss Minutes? I think.
Yes,
yeah,
I believe that's when she tells about what the sacred timeline is.
Yes, that's right. And so doing a whole season, sometimes it's hard to remember every single detail.
Oh, yeah.
But, so I love all that, but I also love that this episode does also begin to tackle the thing which I was kind of talking about, which we're going to begin challenging Loki and who he is. And by starting with telling him what his future was going to be. Like this Loki, what his future would be, to cause the death of his adopted mother, like cause Ragnarok. Like he doesn't know all of the terror to which he's about to bring down on his universe and his life. And I think this is the place where we start on that journey of self-discovery for Loki.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought this was a great setup because the Loki of this time period hasn't done all those things yet, right? And so, in some ways, he himself is kind of shocked as to the things to which he's going to be responsible for. And so it does make me wonder if it's like, well, would this journey have worked with like any other Loki, right? Like that we've seen, like if Loki had done the things he had done in Thor: The Dark World and then Thor Ragnarok, would he have been somebody who had been able to come around to this or not? Because I think it's almost like we found him just at he transfers the TVA at just the right time in his existence to have the opportunity to make a turn. And that's also something we kind of will explore later on when we meet different versions of Loki himself.
Right, as we get more into the multiverse aspect. Yeah, I think that you're right. Well, and I mean, in kind of a funny way, this is the time variance authority, so it could always be the right moment in time because they chose it for that reason.
Yeah, that's a good point. Absolutely.
Thanks. But yeah, I think that he had to be in a place where he could be receptive somewhat to this. He hadn't quite gotten to the dark place where he may not be receptive yet. So, it's sort of that feeling of when you're on your way to a particular moment in your life, you may not fully see things clearly.
Yeah.
And then once you see it, the big picture, you suddenly realize the path you're on. So, yeah, he definitely has that realization, in particular about his mother dying.
Yeah, I think that's just really interesting, that, like you said, being on the right frame, like being in the right frame of mind, and being in the right place to be able to accept something. And it does really almost feel as though, Loki wasn't in a place where he could have accepted it later, unless it was maybe at that time period where, we had gotten to like Endgame.
Right, when he's eventually going to die.
Yeah. And so, I think that's fascinating. I really do. I think that's such an interesting thing to be able to look at this character and kind of like, again, we're going to be dissecting this character. And I think it does. It makes for a really interesting discussion. And this show, it's called Loki, and the whole point is to figure this character out finally, because he's been shifting. And in fact, I think I was reading Tom Hiddleston was even talking about the idea of like, we obviously see the character shifting back and forth all the time. And even the text, of the name of the show is shifting back and forth all the time, right? And so this character is one who continually is doing that. And so I really, really love it. I think it's neat that we get the opportunity to be able to kind of look at that. And so, I think the last thing for this episode that I was struck by is, again, it didn't feel like it rushed anything, but then the revelation we get at the end that actually, who they're after is another Loki. And I thought that, okay, that's pretty fun. That's what we're after is, and then it kind of makes sense as to why the character of Mobius is so interested in Loki as a character, because they have not been able to catch this person. And so it makes sense as, okay, so that's why we want another Loki, because they're going to be the only person who can, catch this. So I thought that was really cool.
Right, like who better to get inside the mind of the criminal than another version of the same person?
Yeah, just another version of the criminal. Yeah. So I thought, episode 2 is really interesting as well, because we have this moment where, Loki is basically trying to BS his way into, getting away. And, thankfully, in all honesty, Mobius is not falling for it. He does, he immediately is able to make some headway, though, into a way to find the other Loki, which I thought was cool. And I loved his thought process, which is that this Loki is hiding in all of these apocalyptic events, because then the TVA doesn't realize there's anything wrong, because those events just lead to destruction. And so anything that really happens there is not going to cause a variance, which it's just kind of genius. And so, I really enjoyed the way that we'll just call him our Loki, is able to figure this out when others just haven't been able to.
Yeah, well, and you deal with two really complex things, especially in this particular episode. One with time travel in general, and trying to explain it and give rules to it is hard. I mean, we've seen that over and over again. And so I'm glad they were able to do that and create this reason that makes logical sense for the character to go there. And then also you're dealing with him and Mobius and this trust or lack thereof of each other. Loki just wants to escape, but in the meantime realizes he could possibly figure some things out better than Mobius can. And then Mobius is trying to decide whether or not he can trust what our Loki is saying at all.
Yep. Well, and I like the way that you put that. Like, this comes down to the idea of trust. And and really, that's the crux of the issue here. Is throughout all of this is going to, one of the big thematic elements will be trust. Will be, how can we trust somebody, and is that possible, especially when somebody has been and spent most of their lives, being an absolute liar, as is the character of Loki has been for his existence. Like, he's known as the god of mischief, and he's really the god of lies. I mean, like, in all honesty. So I think you really hit on something that we're going to be talking about, and becomes a big issue then throughout this entire show.
Right. Because, I mean, like you said, he is the god of mischief, but he's also always been about deception. It's about making holographic versions of himself appear and trick people, about stirring up trouble. I mean, never really being someone that people could trust in any way, even for the smallest thing, or, put faith in to do the right thing.
I think is really cool is also the reveal that, and this is the first time we get this, is this idea of, like, it's not just another Loki that we're after. It's also a female version of Loki. So, like, when we're talking about all of these kind of infinite worlds and infinite possibilities of who these characters can be, like, we're really going to dive into a different version of this character. And somebody who has and in a really cool way, somebody who has a vastly different experience than the Loki that we know, which I think also makes for a very fun exploration throughout the show. So,
and I mean, and that too kind of makes sense where you think about if there are multiple different universes where there are mirror versions of Loki in the reason of like personality, that then we're introducing the idea that Loki is a fluid concept of like, it's the same person on the inside, but not necessarily the exact same body.
Right. Yeah, no, 100%. So, and I think, the fact that she reveals herself to him and then he leaves with her makes for, you're like, oh man, this is what was fascinating to me is like, I think the first episode, it seemed to be taking things at a nice pace. And then all of a sudden, like that happens and you're like, whoa, like we went real quick, real fast, but and not, I don't know, but not in a bad way. Like this, I think did a great job of, again, kind of going at a good pace so we don't feel lost in the show or feel like we're missing anything.
Right. Yeah, I agree. And that's kind of the point where it turns things on its head and is a good moment to kind of bring the pace up a little bit. Since you're not trying to explain so much about our original Loki as much at the moment.
Right. Yeah, no, 100%. So I think one of the interesting things about episode 3 is, again, we kind of move relatively quickly through the beginning of the episode where, the variant arrives at the TVA. She's going to find the timekeepers, but she's confronted by Loki. They get attacked and then they transport away and they arrive at this moon that's about to be crushed by another planet. And as this happens, and as they basically, this episode kind of gives us an opportunity to slow down a little bit and to explore this new character, like who this new Loki is, because it's going to be just as much as we're going to explore the character of the Loki we know, it's going to be very important to explore this new version of Loki because they're going to be pivotal really to the rest of, this season. And so I thought, again, the episode does a great job, I think, of building perfectly. Like it was to me, like with these shows, it's so important to not feel like we're going too fast. And so far, this season does a really good job of doing that and not feeling like that's happening.
Yeah, I think that they go back and forth, like you were saying, with parts that we need to move through quickly. It does feel like that. And then they've taken some time to really focus on the themes that they feel are the most important. I thought this episode was definitely interesting that they do have this more focus on just the two of them rather than so much with the TVA. It quickly goes to them being on Lamentis, which I did think was beautifully done with the set design. And also the feeling of urgency that it gives you as they're having to run to find somewhere to hide from the destruction, to charge the tempad, and then later trying to get aboard the Ark and everything. And even the way that the episode ends, leaving on a cliffhanger of whether or not they're going to be able to get out again. I really liked. It felt a little inconsistent having the original Loki causing a drunken ruckus on the train just because it had been so serious up to that point. But then thinking about him as a character that we know, that's definitely things that you could see him doing. So I'm like, well, I can forgive that.
Yeah, and it is. I think you do kind of raise a valid point there with the whole idea of him kind of raising the ruckus, because like they're supposed to be trying to keep a low profile, and it did seem a little bit strange, and at the same time it also seems pretty Loki to think that, you know, it's not going to matter, that he can kind of just get away with it, because that's very Loki, is to act like that. But I do think that is a good point. And in one of those, I would say, we've talked about this before, but that does kind of create where it's like, no, they need a plot device to get them off the train, and in a place where, you know, they're not going to make the arc, which, you know, it's not the best that I feel like they could come up with, but it works enough. So no, I think it's actually, it's just it is a good point. And I think, you know, I want to ask you, because obviously here we also really, we're not just digging into Sylvie, but we also really start to dig into what the TVA is. And she reveals, you know, in this episode that the TVA, they're not people who were created by these timekeepers. They're actually variants who've been plucked out of existence and are being used by the TVA. Like they're variants just like Loki and Sylvie are, which I thought that was a really cool reveal, especially, you know, and I have no idea about the comics, as I've mentioned before, I haven't read a ton of Marvel comics. And so to like learn that, I thought, oh, wow, that's really neat.
Yeah. And I mean, as far as Loki, I have not read the comics on him at all. I mainly know him from the films, but I do think that this was a really cool reveal like you did. I think that it absolutely makes you think differently about the situation when you have that reveal, and about it, Loki thinking that, you know, he could trust what Mobius told him, because he believed what he was told, that the timekeepers created the TVA and all of the people that work there as well. Not that they would ever have this sinister plan behind the whole thing of plucking people out of their timelines and, you know, controlling them, not even brainwashing them, but like she was saying, people still were aware of what was going on, just couldn't remember their past.
Well,
so yeah, that was cool.
It creates, I think, this kind of neat thing for the show where, because, you know, as we kind of mentioned earlier, we're talking about trust. And so the idea of, like you said, you know, Loki ends up in this place where he doesn't know if he can, you know, trust Mobius now, because there's this lie. And again, this whole series is kind of about like, who can we trust, you know, and figuring out like what is trustworthy, which I think is really interesting. And how do you know? How can you tell if someone is going to be? Yeah. No, 100%. So I think all of that makes for, you know, just a really interesting discussion about those type of things. And so, no, I'm really glad that you brought that up, because, you know, it's one of those things where, as you're watching the show and you're talking about the show, you kind of run into these different themes that keep coming across, you know, and so, I love it. And, you know, they end up missing the arc, and so they really don't have anything else to do, and they end up having this discussion in episode 4 as they're just kind of sitting by this lake, and it creates this moment between them. And I wanted to ask you, just kind of like, how did you first take this moment as you were watching? Did it seem like strange to you that these two characters would be able to have this moment, or did it just like, oh no, that's a Loki thing to do?
it seemed both like something that was very likely for the original Loki to do, but also felt incestuous to me.
Yeah, I can understand that.
Yeah, because I mean, I 100% agreed with Mobius's take on it of like the height of narcissism to fall in love with yourself from another universe. Really? So in that way, like I found it funny, but it turning it to romance to me made it feel creepy. I think they could have had a genuine moment still and not made it eventually where they,
Yeah, that's interesting. And I can 100%, I 100% see what you're saying, because I think even myself, I kind of took it that way at the beginning, because I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. That's kind of weird. But then I also thought about it. It actually is, and I don't know if this speaks to you, but it's not all that different than Miles Morales in Into the Spider-Verse falling for Gwen. They're the same person, just from a different universe, really. Like, they're kind of the same, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's a multiverse version. So when I thought of it that way, it didn't seem as weird. Does that make any sense at all?
It makes sense, but I don't know. To me, they're still different people in that story.
Okay.
Whereas this is like the same personality, just in different bodies.
Sure. No, I can understand that. Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
But, they also say you should love yourself. So
yeah,
I guess
they're
he really
taking
does
that
love himself.
real seriously. Very seriously. So
I just couldn't shake it being weird.
Yeah, no, I totally get it. And I couldn't disagree with you. Like, I really can't. I think you're absolutely right that it is a little bit strange. But I think that's also par for the course for Loki. And that's one of the things that kind of like works about it, is like, okay, well, yeah, that if it's going to be weird for anybody, Loki is definitely the character this is going to be weird for. So,
well, and thinking about whoever could Loki fall in love with,
or who would fall in love with Loki,
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. No, I it was just definitely a question that I had for you, because I did have that moment where I was like, does this work? And then I put it into those, I put it into that thought process, and I was like, okay, it's a little less weird when I think of like, legitimately, this character is a multiverse version, so, and they, in all honesty, and what we do know from the series, like, too, when we think about it, it's like, they're not the same person, at all. They're very different people. And so I think that's something that helped me kind of come to terms with that idea. But no, I think I can get why you struggled with it too. So, because it was kind of strange.
Yeah.
And what did you think about the fact that, when they're captured, what did you think about the time loop that they put Loki in?
I thought that was one of the coolest things they did this whole season. Because if you think about what your definition of hell would be like, having to repeat the same awful moment over and over and over again forever. I mean, gosh, to be left in that, I'm sure, especially, you as a guy watching that, him continually getting kicked in the nuts. That'd be awful. So, I thought that was both a brilliant idea, and you feel so bad for him.
Yeah. Well, and I thought that, to me, the thing that it really did really well was that it gave Loki that time to come to terms with himself, like over and over again. Like he's literally stuck in a moment and he can't get out, right? Like that the U2 song says. And I think the beauty of it is that it really does make him have to come to grips with like who he is. And I think that's the whole show is about bringing Loki face to face with himself over and over again. And so can someone this narcissistic actually learn to care for anyone else? And so by him being confronted with a moment from his past over and over again, it really gives him the opportunity to kind of have a mirror put up for himself, not only here in this moment, but Sylvie is that mirror as well as he's trying to figure that out. And I think it's just really good. Like, it works really well. So,
and he has to explain really to himself why he did what he did to make Sif mad at him. And then continue to boil down to what the point of the situation was and what, the learning experience was.
And that, yes. And it's that over and over again, like constant, there's no, he can't run from it. He can't hide from it. He can't really make jokes from it anymore. He has to come to grips with who he is as a person. And 100%, I think it really works there. And I also, this episode is so fascinating because it's also where a lot of like revelations come down, not just about the character of Loki, but this is where we learn that what we were told by Sylvie is actually true about the TVA. It's where Mobius learns that. So we learn that he was not a part of knowing this about the TVA. He hadn't been hiding this from Loki. In fact, it's just something he didn't know either. And this is where everything kind of like, it starts to fall apart. And not only like really fall apart, but I also think, this is where they confront the Time Masters, and we learn that, they're not really anything. They're just androids. And of course we're on, and then we're of course left with the massive cliffhanger that Loki is quote unquote pruned. So, I mean, this is a huge episode. And this was the one where I think everybody is just kind of like, your jaw does kind of hit the floor a little bit with, what happens. I think they did a really good, this episode, I think they did a great job with, especially, again, I think the pacing is all great here in this episode, and in what they're doing. And I was just really impressed with the way in which, we kind of continue to bring and make these reveals happen. I thought they did another fantastic job with it. So
you're right, though. It was a lot crammed into one episode on this one, but still made sense. I think that the way that they did a little reveal at a time leading up to then it being the timekeepers are actually not real was great. And definitely, leaves everyone confused with the show being called Loki and suddenly seeing the original Loki being pruned and thinking that means he's dead again.
Yep.
Was a good way to leave it. And it, I will say the only thing that kind of frustrated me about it was that for me, the show was supposed to be more on the Loki that we knew from the films. And so at this point, I was a little frustrated, feeling like, so is this now Sylvie's story? Because that's not fair. Why do I care about her? So
Yeah.
I don't know.
No, I could totally see that point, and I think it is one of those things where, and this is, as much as Marvel kind of like, I think, leans on the crutch of the mid-credit sequence a little bit too much. I think this is one where obviously it really helps because, I mean, the show's called Loki. Yeah. They're not going to kill him as seemingly huge as it is to quote unquote prune him. Then we get the moment where, oh no, he's not dead. He's just in another place. And that other place is a place that is full of Lokis. And now I think, and in many ways we're just left at what this mid-credit sequence does so perfectly is it just raises so many more questions. You're like, what in the heck is going on? And I think that's the part of it that was like, to me, like I thought this is really well done. And again, because this is not going to continue to be the case, but this is a place where I do feel like the show again was utilizing time well. Like I feel like so far the show has done a very good job of making you feel like you have enough time to get all the story in. You have enough time to spend with the characters. You're not rushing anything. And you've given me just enough. And that's a criticism that is about to come up though, because I feel like the last two episodes are completely different on that.
But yeah, I agree. I think that the mid-credit sequence you needed here because it gives you a little bit of that relief, even though, logically, okay, the show's called Loki. They can't kill Loki, the original. But you still are a little concerned.
Yeah.
And
well,
then,
it is a shocking moment. I mean, you're just not, you're not necessarily expecting it. And I think that's a good thing though, too. Like to me, that's also another great place where like good TV writing and everything. Yeah. Do something really shocking in that way. Make it kind of insane, like make me wonder what's going to happen. I think that's the cool part is that, if you do a show right, you can do that.
And then also the other thing that, of course, since I didn't know about the comic version of Loki, my husband had to tell me that the reveal was a great nod to the comics because Kid Loki is in the comics. I don't know about the alligator version. But apparently also the Richard E. Grant version of the older, more seasoned Loki was a nod to the classic Loki costume, which was nice. And I love Richard E. Grant anyway.
Oh yeah, I mean he is pretty phenomenal as we get into the fifth episode. A great addition, I think. I think that was one of the things, episode 5 is the place though where I feel like the show slows down a lot and a little bit too much. This did feel like an episode in which we could have sped things up a little bit. I really did. I mean, it's not like I hated the episode or anything, but a lot of the reveals that kind of happened in this episode, I kind of felt like we could have just done more quickly or something. And I feel like it would have been a little bit better for it if we hadn't spent so much time kind of reveling in almost all of these. It felt like they loved the idea of all the Lokis and then couldn't let the love of all the Lokis go. I don't know. How did you feel?
I think that the amount of time spent just of dialogue among all the Lokis and then the bar fight among all the Lokis was just too long. because I did enjoy seeing all these different versions and them all being in one place. I definitely thought that the alligator was hilarious, and I love all of the jokes that have come out of that with like Croc shoes wearing a crown. But yeah, it felt self-indulgent and not helpful to the story movement at all. Just like I said, just self-indulgent to be self-indulgent. You could have shown them, had a brief explanation, and then shown Sylvie showing up. Although I do think that the Loki that shows up, that's another version of Tom Hiddleston but in a different outfit, was cool.
Yeah, I like President Loki. Yeah, that was pretty fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He had a very nice suit.
He did have a very nice suit. No, I agree with that. This is one of those places where I felt like the show all of a sudden did kind of slow to a crawl, which was kind of weird. And we spent a lot of time here, and then there aren't a ton of like major revelations. So, and because, and then again, we get to episode 6, and, everything, basically, episode 5 is just a lot of setup so we can get to episode 6 and then, like, do the thing.
But there were 2 big things about 5 that I did like, and one was that you find out that although previously Mobius was also pruned, that he's still alive.
Yes, that's true. Yes.
And then also that the Richard E. Grant older Loki gets his moment to scream glorious purpose and try to control Eliath, and that was brilliant.
Yeah, I thought that was really cool. That whole moment was really neat. I think it was really well done. I think that was something that I was pretty impressed by. I wouldn't say that I felt like the special effects were amazing in that scene, but I think they were effective. Yeah,
like of him trying to create a deceptive version of Asgard for it to attack. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that all that was cool. And, let me give him a little bit of credit. I do think one of the things that helps in this show like that is we're dealing with all of these super crazy, ultra ridiculous things in the first place. And I think it really it really helps that everything is so kind of over the top. And so one of the best parts about the show is that we have this opportunity to do these big crazy things, and it's not all that weird, like
right, because it's a comic book universe, right. You accept that it's going to be zany.
Yeah, and it's going to look crazy.
Yeah, and it may not look the best.
Right. Like not everything is going to look perfect. And not everything needs to look perfect, which is good. So, but no, I think this worked pretty well. So I definitely think it was a good episode. It wasn't great. I did feel like they could have just, gone slightly more quickly, and that would have helped. But, all in all, I enjoyed it enough. And I think the biggest thing, though, is when we get to episode 6, there isn't a ton of action in the episode. There's a lot of talking, and it's not necessarily a terrible thing to have a show that has a lot of talking. Like, I'm not against that or anything, but it did feel like there was just a lot of the episode is just kind of like comic book reveal time. And that kind of, it wasn't as much, I don't know, just there was something missing in that to me. I don't know. What did you think?
Yeah, I felt like if you're going to have a lot of talking, it needs to get to the point and, get to why we're doing all of this. And I felt like it was a lot of talking just for show. And And I don't know how much of that was writing and how much of that was Jonathan Majors' performance, but I didn't like it. It just felt like it was very loud and performance-y rather than having a valid point and getting to it, if that makes sense. Did you feel the same way?
You mean about his
or
performance
you mean other than
specifically?
that? Yeah, it felt like that scene with them meeting He Who Remains went on way too long and not necessarily for a good reason. I didn't feel like I got a lot of clear information out of it.
Oh, right. No, I didn't agree with that part. I mean, because I didn't have a problem with the dialogue that we were getting or what we were talking about specifically. I just felt like there was just a lot of dialogue. And I, not that it's terrible that we would have... The problem is that I think that you left to the very end of the show, obviously, all this major reveal, right? Like, this major thing has been building, and we only have this one moment to be able to answer all of these questions. And it's a little bit frustrating that we have to spend so much of the episode explaining. It's like a massive comic book page of text, like where all of the stuff finally comes out, and like it's not terrible. It's just a lot, and so I kind of wish that we hadn't had to wait so long to get all of this massive explanation of what all of this is. Now, as per the explanation and what it is, I mean, this to me was the most fascinating. It was the most fascinating part of the show. Like, what we're discussing is, I mean, we're asking questions about free will and predestination in a comic book show, which is a really crazy, cool, massive discussion, and the fact that we're having it here at the show, I felt like it was the best part of the show to me, because we're asking such a big, big question, to which has a lot to do with, what we believe in real life about things. That was kind of neat to me.
I'm glad that you felt that way. I didn't get the same feeling from it, just because it felt too little too late. Like you were saying, it's a lot of stuff explained in the final episode of a series. Now, we know we're getting a season 2, thankfully, but it felt to me that they could have done some introduction of this part earlier in some other episodes to then make this easier to get to in the final episode and not have so much talking. And then also, I feel like you kind of get yourself on a slippery slope of having Loki realizing originally that the TVA is behind everything, and then them realizing together that the TVA is a lie in itself and that it's made up of variants that were pulled from their own timelines. And then now you've got them facing another person above that, like another video game boss that created the TVA, and it just feels a little Inception-y to me. And maybe that's how it was originally written in the comics, and they can't help that. I'm not sure. But I know that at least the whole He Who Remains piece was part of the comics, because I've heard about that. So that part kind of bothered me. But then also it just felt like the focus wasn't as much on this being a story about those themes as it was a focus on Loki and Sylvie, and really more on Sylvie, and that they briefly mention free will and predestination. And I think that you kind of cheapen whether or not that moment is true of, this guy, He Who Remains, being the one that controlled everything, because they make him unable to be trusted in the first place. So then it constantly feels like that back and forth of like, well, how do we know we can trust you? Well, how do I know I can trust you? Well, you can't, so I didn't even know if I believed that what He Who Remains was saying was true at all.
Right. Yeah.
You know what I mean? So yeah, it was just a lot going on.
Yeah. No, I can totally understand that. And I think one of the things that you're mentioning is kind of why I liked it. And let me be honest, it took me a while to get to the place where I liked it, because I didn't like it at first. I thought that it was too much, and I didn't quite feel like we had earned it, I guess. But
yeah,
as I've sat with it, I actually really enjoyed, because, and I watched the finale again. It was the only episode I got a chance to rewatch, and I thought they have some, and maybe you're right, maybe they don't do it well enough, but I felt like they were diving into some really big and interesting ideas that no Marvel show has even like attempted, I feel like, to kind of discuss. And so the idea of like predestination and free will was crazy that we're discussing that in a Marvel show. And then the thought process of do the ends justify the means, right? That's kind of a question that we're getting in this show as well, like, because this guy at the end of time is not all wrong, which is interesting, and actually, maybe the only thing that can save, he may be right. Like, this may be the only way to save everything. And I think that's really interesting as a question. Yeah, I don't know. Part of it, and having the struggle of like how to even talk about it, is just because it's so big. It's such a big question. So yeah, I don't know. I do get it not working as well for you. And I can't fault you for that, because I do feel like, and this is the reason I think I have that criticism, is that it does feel like the final episode, or that fifth episode, we spend so much time, just kind of milling about in many ways in this void. And then the final episode is tasked with really trying to lay down and explain all of these things in such a major way that maybe what we needed is some way to stream down episode 5 and 6 and just put them together, or you just needed episode 6 and more time to sit with everything.
Well, or I mean, I think that you mentioned it earlier, and I was agreeing with you. We could introduce some points that are going to come up later in earlier episodes.
Yeah.
Without giving it away and still having a good reveal, but not having so much content to then dump on everybody and have all these other things mixed in with it. I think it was just a lot.
Yeah.
And then too, I just had a problem with the kiss. I felt like it was not the right moment. I felt like it was not authentic, and like it was just people in the writer's room saying, and we have to make them kiss, even if it's not the right moment. And then too, it kind of in a sad way of like with Sylvie's character, I think that if you're someone who's rooting for Sylvie, that then her accomplishing her goal, but realizing that it's not going to make her feel any better, proves the original Loki's point that you don't need to kill him.
Yeah.
So it just, there were a lot of things about it that I rubbed me the wrong way and that I would have written differently.
Yeah, I can absolutely 100% see that. And I think you have, I don't think I can fault you for feeling that way at all. I do think that there are places where it could have just been, again, I do feel like it seems to be, like, I felt like the series had done such a good job time-wise up to this point, and then all of a sudden we kind of just warp speed in that last episode to the point where it's like, oh my gosh, wow, we're already here. Oh, and all this stuff is happening, and we're getting thrown all of these ideas, and oh, you better accept all these ideas. Like, you have so much to kind of like take in and accept, and it gets a little bit crazy, and it gets a little bit... Yeah. So I 100% agree with that. And what I wanted to ask you, though, with this 6th episode is, how did you feel about this? I mean, because you mentioned you felt like maybe it was a little bit too much to have this idea that there being somebody else, but this opens up a massive can of worms for the MCU in the sense that this is the can of the multiverse that we finally opened now, and now it's here. And it exists permanently. Like, and Loki is the cause, How do you feel about the multiverse being a part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe now? Are you excited about it? Were you ready for it? Do you feel like this is a good way to kind of give us that?
I think that the introducing of it could have been done a lot better, because I didn't realize that was what was happening. That to me is bad storytelling. I was just going, so wait, who is this guy and why do I care? And, we've been so conditioned from the films to kind of be aware of who the big players are. Like, I knew that Thanos was eventually coming and what that meant and, kind of who Thanos was in a general sense before he got there.
Right.
But with this, I'm just told it's this guy, He Who Remains. And I'm like, okay, who is that? Why do I care? What does he do? And then they have the explanation that he's created the TVA and he is at the end of time. And, he's controlling the timeline. And that there are these other universes. But it still kind of feels, I hate using the word over and over again, but unearned. And it doesn't make me feel invested in the next piece of the journey. So it's like I left feeling on a down note rather than excited for what the next step is going to be. Did you feel that way at all? I just felt like not enough explanation was given for somebody who already doesn't really, know much about that piece of the comics.
Yeah, I think it is a really good question. And so this is like, me, as coming from somebody who doesn't know the comics at all. And I think for me, I had to sit with this for a while, honestly. I had to come to grips with like what they were trying to do and realize, okay, so we're introducing the multiverse, and that's what this whole thing is about. Because I felt the same way you did when I first watched the episode. Like, I was like, wait, what? Like, that's it? That's legitimately what I said. I was like, huh?
Like, and then it just ended.
Yeah. And as I sat with it, I really began to kind of piece together everything, and I began to think about it more, and it became more interesting. And I think the most interesting thing was all of the questions that it had raised about, like, could this benevolent dictator be better than what was coming. Like I just was sitting with all those questions. I was like, I don't love the fact that we got there so quickly, but I do love the fact that we asked a ton of really great questions, and that I now am interested to see where season 2 will go. I think where my reticence comes in with that whole question of like introducing the multiverse and everything is to know that, well, a part of the answer isn't just going to come in Loki season 2. It's going to be coming in like Doctor Strange's next movie and all that kind of stuff. And I'm not as excited with the opportunity to explore this with a different character, right? Like I'm interested in exploring this with Loki still.
Right.
And I think part of this is me feeling like I don't want to just jump into, like, I'm having to watch all of these things and connect them all together, and I can't get a whole story anymore from even a show, right? You know, the best part about Falcon and Winter Soldier was that it told us one story. You know, how Falcon becomes Captain America and how the Winter Soldier, you know, finds his way actually to not be the Winter Soldier anymore.
Yeah.
And it told the whole story. You know, here it's like the only story to which I want to ask you the next question about is do you feel like that they did a good job with Loki and bringing him to the place where he seems to have changed? Do you buy the change?
No. And honestly, it's because I feel like, for one, that it's not the Loki I knew. I think that I wanted to see a better explanation of how he got to where he's supposed to be at the end of this show. And that it seems like not that he changed for the better, but that he became less of himself, not in a good way. You know what I mean? Like, I don't feel like he's a better person. I feel like he's now just a more sad person.
Fascinating. Interesting.
Yeah, I just, you know, because I felt like it became that whole scene of him saying to Sylvie, I just want you to be okay. And I'm like, but what do you want? Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's your story. What was the ultimate goal for the original Loki? Now it's just, I put myself aside and I want to know that you're okay. And I'm like, but why? I don't know.
Yeah.
It just felt cheap.
It's really interesting that you feel that way, because to me, I love it. I really thought that it worked for me. The fact that Loki would get to the place where he would ask a question about somebody else and he would want somebody else to be okay over himself is the point to me. Like, that if we're going to redeem Loki, if we're going to make him more of a hero character, you know, we're going to give him some redemption. The way he has to be able to do that is to be able to think less about himself and more about others. So at that last episode, he's thinking about the universe. He's thinking about Sylvie. He's thinking about, even if I don't want this throne, maybe it is better than what could come and what could happen. And for the first time in his life, he doesn't want power and control. He seemed to truly be thinking about the betterment of everybody else other than himself. And to me, that's why it worked. That's the thing I really responded to with the end of the series, is that I personally didn't believe that you could get Loki to this point, but I felt like that they had systematically had him come to, he had looked at the Loki in the mirror over and over and over again, and what he had come up with, which he did not like himself. He did not like who he was. And he was able to find a way to make a change. And that change was to stop putting Loki first and to put others first.
But then if they're the same person, isn't he still putting Loki first?
Well, and that's the thing that I think where I come at it from different perspective, in the sense that I don't think they're the same person, because their experiences are completely different and it made them different people, you know? So, you know, if it's that whole, like, if I went back in time and changed part of my life, what would change, you know? Like, and how would I be completely different because I didn't have, say, this massive experience that I've had, right? And so they are completely different people, and therefore he isn't putting himself first and putting her first. He is putting her first, because she's not him, you know? They are completely different people. Their experiences make them completely different people. They have similarities, much the same way twins have similarities, right? But they're also completely different too. So to me, that's what made it work. And that's why I think I ended up really liking it and buying it. I just feel like that last episode, there's so much talk, and it's so important for what's going to happen in the Marvel Universe that it seems to go by so quickly. That I wish, like we said, there had been maybe some more hints throughout the whole season to be able to kind of plant some of those ideas in our head in a way. And maybe if I watched it again, they're there, and I just hadn't picked them up because I didn't know what to look for. But if that's the case, then yeah, I think I'm right in giving it a little bit of criticism there. So I don't know if any of that helps you at all, but that's just where I came down to it. And I'll say this. Whereas with Black Widow, the more I thought about it, the less I liked it. With Loki, the more I thought about it, the more I've sat with it, the more I've enjoyed it. And so...
Well, that's good to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. So to me, that's a good thing. And part of that, again, came down to the fact that I had some big things to think about, because it was asking big questions. It had big ideas that much of the Marvel Universe doesn't seem to really want to touch unless it's like Civil War. And so I was just kind of glad that we were in a Marvel show that really wasn't afraid to, like, maybe free will and predestination aren't that bad of a things to be talking about. Maybe predestination isn't too bad when somebody's actually trying to do it for good, you know, and like, and he's not even he's kind of like this benevolent dictator, but is that necessarily a bad thing with what can come? And like, all of those were great questions. And now we're going to have to deal with the ramifications of that. And so, and of course, he's going to show up again in this character as Kang the Conqueror, one of the versions of He Who Remains in Quantumania, the next Ant-Man and Wasp movie. And then, of course, we're going to be playing with this in Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. So, you know, all of these things have been working together. I do just kind of wish still there was more of a complete story. But at least I felt like I got that with Loki. So obviously we've gone a long time, you know, talking about a whole episode of a whole 6 episodes of television takes more time. But I'm really interested, though, you know, to see where you kind of come down then with the show and your ratings. And then I think it would be kind of fun if we also gave our rankings of the first 3 to see where they fall as well. So, yeah, where do you fall down with Loki?
Sure. So, yeah, I do think that we raised a lot of good points, and, you know, you can look at it from 2 completely different sides and still find some middle ground on it. I think that ultimately I come down to a 3 out of 5 alligator Lokis, because I did enjoy some things about it, but for me, about halfway through was when it started to fall apart. But I could see how you would still get a lot out of it, you know, from what you were saying. But I, for one, I think that in general, it has this weakness, like you were saying, a little of not being an easily accessible story. Mm-hmm. It's not contained in this one show. You have to watch all of the other shows and the movies to get what's going on, and still may not get what's going on. So I think that kind of is a weakness of it as well. But mainly I think that they could have written it better about the original Loki that we start with. I think it goes a little too far off on other tangents from him. For what I wanted. And then I just felt like the discomfort I had with him and Sylvie becoming a romantic item just continued for me till the end. And that the kiss wasn't really appropriate for the time that they threw it in. And then, you know, like you said as well, they threw a lot of information into the final episode, and then it just ended. It took some digesting before you were okay with it. And I still am just kind of at that place where I'm like, am I excited about a season 2? Am I excited about more Marvel shows?
Right.
Not really. And that sucks. But, you know, not everybody felt that way. And I'm glad, you know, I mean, I wanted to be pumped for more. So I'm hoping that it gets better. But yeah, I come to a 3 out of 5.
I think where you are, and your critiques are, 100% valid. And in many ways, you know, I found myself, like, again, having some of those when it first ended. And so I can't fault you at all. And I think for myself, because I know you just got a chance to finish the season, like, this week, like I think it was today.
Yeah.
So I know you haven't had any time to sit with the show at all. So I'll be interested to see if that changes anything or if it doesn't. Or, but for me, it did change, and it did get better. And I'd say even talking about it today, you can only do half stars on Letterboxd, but I would give this 3.75 out of 5. I can't give it 4 stars. It can't ever go higher than that, I don't think, because of what we talked about. But I'm interested to see where they go. I am slightly disappointed, though, that so much of this is going to be playing out in different areas of the Marvel Universe, and we're not just going to leave what's happening here for the show. So, but yeah, I 3.75 out of 5. So if you had to rank all 3 so far with WandaVision, and Falcon, Winter Soldier, and then Loki, what do you think you'd do?
I would do Falcon and Winter Soldier at number 1, WandaVision at 2, and Loki at 3.
Wow, that's fascinating. I'm going to go Loki at number 1, Falcon, Winter Soldier at number 2, and WandaVision at 3. So, yeah. I just, WandaVision and I did not get along. So,
yeah.
Well, we've reached that time of the show where we do some recommendations. So I'm interested to see what you might want to recommend to everybody this week.
Yeah. So I actually lately have been getting into more YouTube stuff.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I think that it's just as much now as valid of a streaming platform as Netflix, Hulu, all the other stuff. I mean, especially if you get like YouTube TV or they started with YouTube Red. I mean, heck, that's how we originally saw the new Cobra Kai show.
Yeah, it's true.
But I've discovered some individuals that have really great channels, and a lot of times I can get annoyed with people that I feel like are not being sincere with their content on YouTube, where it's just following trends rather than being who they are. But that's not the case for this person, so I wanted to share. I really love this creator named Angie Belmar, and that's Bellemare. She and her husband Andre are in Canada, but actually started because she was getting sick a lot and ended up in the hospital. focusing more on their health and realizing that, you know, if all you do is party and eat fried food,
Right.
that your body feels like crap the older you get, especially. And just completely changed their lives because they were like, we don't want to feel like this anymore.
That's awesome.
So, yeah. So now all of her content is about their journey together as a couple with that. And then also about starting a business as coaches for health and fitness. And then I've actually decided to use her as a coach myself. So,
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
yeah, I just wanted to share that because she's very genuine. None of it is a gimmick. And none of it's about trying to sell you something.
That's great.
She's just being who she is and being happy. And that really resonated with me.
That's really cool. No, I think that's, like you said, that's really important, you know, and anybody these days, it is so easy to tell when people are just fake, you know, with stuff.
Yeah.
And authenticity does matter. And so, yeah, that's really neat. And I think it's really cool that, like you said, that it helped you want to be more healthy yourself. Like, I think that's awesome that was the case. So,
Thanks.
I mean, I can't think of a better thing for a creator than to be able to say, oh yeah, I helped somebody actually want to make their life better. I think that's amazing. So yeah, that speaks really highly of that person and that work. So, so the other day, my wife and I watched a movie on Netflix, and it had just come out. It's called Gunpowder Milkshake, and it stars the one and only Karen Gillan, who I love, and of course also has Lena Headey from Game of Thrones, played Cersei, and so cool. It's basically the setup and the elevator pitch is it's John Wick with women, and you know, it's ridiculously violent, of course, like the John Wick movies are. But I had fun with it. Both my wife and I had fun with it. And so if you're just looking for kind of a shoot 'em up type movie, with a great cast that actually kind of left me excited to see what if they did a sequel? What would that be like? I'd be interested in seeing that. So yeah, I really enjoyed Gunpowder Milkshake, so I'm going to highly recommend that. But, Christy, if people want to catch up with you and see what else you've got going on, where can they find you?
Well, you can find me on Instagram and Twitter at BestBenBell, and of course in the Babel Conference on Facebook. And then when I'm not here in the 602 Club, I am on my show called Sabers and Spells with my friends Amanda and Teresa, talking about some more niche geek stuff that we don't usually get to talk about. We've been on a little bit of a break because Amanda is getting married in 20 days. But hope to be back soon and talk about, some Loki stuff maybe over there, or, get into, I don't know, maybe I'll make Amanda watch Misfits with me and talk about that. So yeah, we'll see, but Sabers and Spells everywhere on social media as well.
Of course, you can find me all over social media, MattRushing02. You could find me here doing literary treks as well as The Orb with Chris Jones. Literary treks about the books and the comics of Star Trek, and The Orb about Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Of course, Snyder Cuts. We'll have a new episode of that coming out soon as John and I talk about the making of book for Army of the Dead. So check that out here in this feed with the 602 Club. And over on the Nerd Party Network, doing two shows. One is finished. It's called Owlpost. Did that with Drea Kaufman as we talked about every single chapter of the Harry Potter series. And then you could find me with Aggressive Negotiations with John Mills, as each and every week we're just diving into something fun with Star Wars because it's a Star Wars show. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining us.
And y'all come back now, you hear?
Thank you.